Good evening and welcome to the Monday, February 12, 2018 Board of Education meeting. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So before we turn to the agenda, I'd just like to say what I think is really on everybody's mind, and that is that the last couple of weeks, the last 2 weeks have been a difficult 2 weeks, both for people connected with the Guilford Public Schools, but also really for the Guilford community at large. This we're going to talk about. I know Dr. Freeman is going to give us an update on some of the recent events and specifically the tragic loss of Ethan's song. I think we have learned really a lot out of this tragedy. I think the fact is that the school community, I've never been more impressed with how the school community pulled together. I know we all got comments, we all got thoughts and observations from parents and from kids. I know the administration, the leadership, the faculty, the staff. I just think they acted in an exemplary way in a very, very difficult time that really fortunately had been unprecedented for us up to this point. But we will talk about this a little more, but I just want to, on behalf of the Board of Education, thank not only the staff and the faculty and the administration, but also the first responders in Guilford, the Youth and Family Services, the police department, fire department, obviously, but also, just the community at large, because the community really showed what it means to be part of this town. And I love this town. This is a great town. But when we join together after incidents like that, I'm never prouder, never happier, never more honored, really, to be a part of this community. So I just want to extend the thanks of all of us on the board to the entire Guilford community. Turning to the agenda, there is not going to be a student representatives report tonight. They are away, all at some kind of an event, from what I understand. And we do need to add an item to the agenda, 8.4 under the superintendent's report. Results from the state of Connecticut Next Generation Accountability Performance Accountability results. Those results were embargoed by the state of Connecticut until after the agenda was prepared, so we couldn't really talk about them, but now we can. So if there is a motion to add that to the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that's 8.4 would be review of performance accountability?
Yes.
Results?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, minutes. There are a lot of minutes because of all the budget meetings, but 3.1 were the January 8th regular meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any changes, corrections,
Just a
clarifications?
couple of minor changes. Under board agenda 9.3, I would just add in the last sentence of the first paragraph, with a budget of $92.2 million and a final project cost of $90.54, and add million.
That's reasonable.
Yes.
Add million to the final project cost of $90.54.
Million.
It didn't come in at $90. It would have been nice, but okay.
Another small change, number 7, under student representatives, the first line, just making representative plural to representatives. And then lastly, 9.2, let me just get there, sorry. It reads that Mrs. Cohen explained about or highlighted some of the clerical and paraprofessional contract. I was actually not on that negotiation team. I believe that was Mrs. Sullivan who had highlighted the terms of the contract.
Well, and
I was just gonna say.
The numbers are actually not correct.
If I may make another correction, right, so the salary increase under that section should read 2.25%.
For a total, so the total is the same.
Right. And then I had, and I handed this to Terry for these minutes on page 6, under 10.1, the policy committee report. It's a little confusing what we're trying to do, so I did hand Terry this correction. I'll read it out loud. Dr. Balistraci reported that the policy committee is reviewing a policy on sexual abuse education and school reporting requirements. They are looking to incorporate the policy regulation with the child abuse reporting regulation, as the requirements are the same.
Very good.
Okay. Any other corrections or clarifications or changes? Then all in favor of the motion as
Aye.
amended? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, January 18, special meeting. That's the meeting, I think, with the principals, right? Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Any changes or clarifications? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. January 22nd is a public forum. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved?
Second.
Changes, corrections, clarifications? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And January 23rd, public forum on the budget. Motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second.
Anything, any amendments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And then January 29th, special meeting, and that was the meeting to approve the budget, to move forward to the Board of Finance. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Anything on these, corrections, clarifications?
I do, Mr. Boss, have a
Yeah.
correction on page 4, about halfway down the paragraph that starts Dr. Balistraci highlighted. The second sentence, I'm just going to ask if it could be stricken. It says, she also commented that she feels that the $22,000 to help make an administrator available for the IB program is a relatively small investment. That $22,000 is actually not for the IB program. I think it's just, it's confusing. And really, I was highlighting that the success of providing professional development would make that having the $22,000 to extend an 11-month to a 12-month position was worthwhile.
Strike the whole sentence.
Yes, I'm just, unless someone has a problem with it, I just think it's confusing and it doesn't say anything that's accurate.
Okay. Would that change? Are there any others? Then all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item 4, public topics, public forum for topics on the board agenda. I don't see anybody that wishes to speak. Mr. Kazin, you were the reviewer of the expenditures.
I was, and we discussed the many items of the warrant thoroughly and the financials thoroughly in the operations committee. So I'd move that we accept the warrant, which totaled $2,238,463.29 in payments within the total expenditures and encumbrances of $4,785,231.93.
Okay, motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Communications. I'd like to suggest if people had communications relating to the Ethan song, just hold off on those maybe for when Dr. Freeman is talking about that, because I think we all got quite a few communications about that. Any other communications, though, that we want to talk about? Okay. All right, then we're skipping over number 7, and then so we're up to you, Dr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Bloss. I'll start by saying I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to say this any better than you did, but I did want to take a moment and recognize here, as we all know, on January 31st, Ethan Song died, 15-year-old freshman in our high school. And while we share our sympathies with the family and with Ethan's friends, and while we grieve for that loss, like Mr. Bloss, I could not have been prouder of our students or this school community, or in fact the extended community in which we reside. I watched this community come together around that loss and around that family. I was enormously proud of the way that our school staffs responded. And I'd like to point out not just the high school. Ethan was a student in our school system from elementary school through. We had students who were grieving that loss at least at both the high school and at Adams. We had students who were shocked and saddened and confused by that loss throughout our school system. And we had staff members who had worked and taught Ethan at Melissa Jones, at Baldwin, at Adams, and at the high school. And so I watched this community rally around the people who were affected by that loss. Our leadership, Principal Walker and Principal Macenti, nobody can take a school through a loss like that except for the school principal. And they both did exceptional work, both preparing and then putting their own emotions aside while they took their schools through the days that followed. Our staff members and our teaching staff likewise set their own emotions aside and made sure that they were there for their children. And quite honestly, our students were exceptional. The way that they reached out to each other, the students who stopped me in the hallway of the high school to ask me if I was okay on Thursday morning, they were mature, they were there for each other, and they supported each other. The community came out enormously. We had offers from every immediate neighboring school district, and we had offers from school districts as far flung as Farmington and Montville, wanting to know if we needed support. Did we need support staff, mental health staff in the buildings? The therapy dogs were a tremendous asset. What started out as one dog, David Myers came with his dog Summer in the morning, and by lunchtime we must have had half a dozen therapy dogs in the school. Summer had the support of Canine FR as well, and the students reached out. By Friday we had a therapy dog in Adams as well as the dogs that we had here at the high school. And it was particularly fitting because Ethan was a dog person. And so all of the friends who knew him not only appreciated having the dogs here, but thought it was fitting that they were here because of Ethan. And Guilford Youth and Family Services was exceptional. They were on site at the high school Thursday, Friday, and Monday following the event. They opened their offices Saturday and Sunday, the immediately following weekend, to continue offering services. First Congregational Church opened their doors immediately Wednesday evening, hours after we learned of the event, to have a place for students to gather. They opened Thursday after school to give students a place to be together. And Thursday afternoon, that was staffed by Youth and Family Services from Madison, because our support staff were simply tired. And Madison came, and their Youth and Family Services provided support to the children in Guilford. It was simply an exceptional response to a tragedy that I hope we never experience again. But I spent the following days incredibly sad and yet incredibly proud at the same time. And I'll just finish by noting that tonight we play a high school varsity basketball game at Daniel Hand High School. And both schools are planning to white out the cheering section. Students are coming wearing white, both from Guilford and from Daniel Hand. There won't be green and black and gold in the audience. There will be white in the stands at tonight's basketball game. And the principals, coaches, and teams are meeting at center court to recognize Ethan before they begin the game tonight. And I think that's an exceptional gesture on the part of the students at Daniel Hand. And I just want to extend our thanks to them as well. It's an exceptional community that dealt really, really well with an exceptional tragedy, and I was proud of every single member of this community.
Anybody have thoughts or comments? I know we all have received some communications from people kind of thanking the district for the help to the children, but
If I may, I mean, I was having a conversation within the last week with our first selectman, Matt Hoey, and one of the things I mentioned to him was that I think one of the things that the response showed me was that when, as a school system and as a town, you build relationships with each other, the superintendent with the first selectman's office, you know, as one example of many, what happens then is that the rollout of the response is I just think that was impressive. I mean, relationships with, between our school system and Guilford Youth and Family Services are important year-round, but those kinds of collaborations and relationships and the time put into those really then shows itself brilliantly when it has to really step into action quickly. So I just thought that was impressive, and I wanted to mention that as well.
First Selectman Hoey and Representative Scanlon were immediately present and completely helpful, and Chief Hutchinson in the Guilford Police Department, while they were responsible for their own work around this incident, continually reached out and checked in with us in the schools to make sure that we had everything that we needed. Could they help keep press away from our schools? Could they provide officers in the building? Some of the dogs that were there with Guilford police officers. Could they help with traffic control? They were present at the vigil. They were present at the wake. They were present at the funeral, while they were responsible for their own jobs, making sure that we had everything that we needed. They couldn't have been more helpful.
I think most importantly, perhaps most importantly, were the testaments of the children that were in the schools and expressing their gratitude and praise for a job well done by the administration and the members of the community, and jumping, forward and having the therapy dogs on site and having support staff. So that was. It was just really great to hear and heartwarming. So,
It's my understanding there's a petition to make summer full-time.
yes, I did see that.
I did see that as well.
Yeah. And I want to just echo one thing you just mentioned, and to thank the press, frankly, for
Yes.
for helping to not make it more difficult than it already was. I know the press has got their job, and we all value that, and we think that it's a vital part of our democracy. But I think the press understood that there wasn't really newsworthy value in staking out the school and taking pictures of kids at walking into the building and trying to interview people coming out of the building. That would have just been too difficult. And so I really want to thank them for the press for the discretion they used. It didn't have to be like that, but it was, and I think we should all acknowledge that.
And in fact, reporters like Zoe Roos from the Courier asking if there was information about supports that we wanted to get out into the community, rather than asking if she could get quotes about how upset the students were. So members of the press helping us to get information out to our community rather than getting in the way of us getting supports to our kids. Thank you for remembering that. Pleasure.
Also, I think as a board, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge Dr. Freeman for his empathetic leadership and being a role model for everything that you acknowledged with the town.
Okay, well, so I guess let's turn to the, it's a little hard to really go to the just regular business after with that, but just as the kids went to school the next day, so too do we have to kind of press ahead. The 8.2 is the whole, I think, Dr. Freeman, you're talking about the stress anxiety update, and that is to kind of look, as we're trying to do more globally, is to look at not some of these things like the homework policy and the start times and transitions kind of as separate issues, but to try to have some kind of a holistic review of what is it that we can do as a district to try to make the educational experience more manageable, more.
That's exactly right, and I did just want to update the board. I know that the board is aware that we have been looking at individual changes that we could make that would improve conditions here in the schools for students, like the homework review that we conducted last year, like the conversation that's been ongoing about the importance of appropriate sleep and start times for our high school students. But as we have engaged in those piecemeal conversations, I have come to recognize that from my position, I need to be looking holistically at the systems and the structures in place and whether they help to insulate students from stress and anxiety or whether they contribute to student stress and anxiety. We know that young adolescents, that young children are experiencing increasing rates of stress, anxiety, school avoidance or school phobia, and depression, not just in Guilford but across the nation. And so in my mind, I want to work hard not to look at individual pieces of a puzzle, but to try to understand the full puzzle. And so the first and maybe the biggest component is that we've been having a long conversation in this community about sleep. We know that it's important. We know that it insulates students from stress and anxiety and depression, and that's one of the pieces that we need to continue to pursue. But I don't want to get lost in the conversation the fact that we're also looking carefully at school structures. We're looking at the ways that we talk about grading and the ways that we talk about achievement, and how can we do that in a way that sets high expectations but is healthy for our students. We're looking at in-school supports. How do we identify students who are struggling with stress, anxiety, or school avoidance? How do we identify them early, and how do we support them and help them to address those concerns and work through those concerns? And additionally, as has been mentioned a couple times during the budget process, we're also looking at transitions within our schools, and we're thinking very creatively about trying to reduce the number of transitions, because transitions, especially for middle school age adolescents, can be very disruptive. And if they are going to be one more hurdle or one more contributor to stress and anxiety, then we need to ask ourselves honestly, are those the right structures, and should we try to reduce transitions, have fewer of them, and do better with our work around a smaller number of transitions? In that effort, I have been meeting with groups like Guilford Day, Guilford Mentoring, Guilford Youth and Family Services. I've met informally with a number of the local private clinicians with whom we work in the community. With or without Dr. Canapari, who has joined me for some of these meetings, we have met with the faculties at Guilford High School, Adams Middle School, Baldwin Middle School. We've met with about 80 student leaders here at Guilford High School. I have begun to have this conversation with a number of PTOs in the community, and we met with the local leadership of all of the youth at volunteer athletic programs that support the same population of children here in the Guilford schools. So I just want the community to be aware, as the board is aware, that the conversation that started with sleep is bigger than just sleep. And we need to be thinking about a system that facilitates the work that we do, not a system against which we have to labor or fight as we do the work of educating our students. And so as we continue these conversations, I know that the Start Time Task Force is hoping to have recommendations to be made to this board. Ginny Brown is meeting with all of our in-house mental health support positions. She has been tasked to have a list of recommendations back to me by the end of this school year. And as recommendations around those various topics come together, I want to assure this board and this community that I will work to always present those as part of a full environment that strives to be healthy and strives to support our students, rather than an environment which contributes to the stress and anxiety that we know students are laboring with in today's world.
Questions, comments, thoughts?
Well, I would just say that I really appreciate and think it's important that we look at the issue of stress and anxiety as both an issue that we have to, work to prevent with students, as you're talking about with the homework and the start times, but also something that we do have to address, that we do have children who are actively experiencing symptoms that are pretty significant, and we have to have the resources to help them. So they're really two different groups that we're trying to support. It's a big project, but I think it's important to do what we can in both areas. So I appreciate your work.
It's an important conversation. We'll have more on that moving forward.
Well, and just to put it out there so it's really clear, when you talk about reducing transitions, that is changing the alignment in grades 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and so that Baldwin would be a 5th through 8th grade school for the the Lakes and the Jones district, and Adams would be a 5-8 school for the Cox and Elite district. Now, before anybody says, "Oh my gosh, what are they doing?" This is a topic of discussion. This is a
Correct.
possibility. This is not something that we've decided is a good thing to do. There is obviously, I think we all understand that whenever any kind of a change like this is contemplated, that we have to get out and talk about it and see what people think, see if people think it's a good idea or not, and if not, can something be done about that, and if so, when could it possibly be implemented? So it's something we're looking at. It is not done, but
It's an idea that I think merits further exploration, and when it comes to restructuring of the middle schools, we're very much at the beginning of that exploration. When it comes to thinking about start time, we've done some good work and are further along in that particular item. But I have come to understand over the last several months that all of these pieces need to always be discussed as parts of a larger environmental whole and not as any individual standalone panacea, because I don't believe that there's one standalone panacea.
okay. Do you want to just update us on where we are on both the town budget and the state budget?
So locally, I would start by simply, again, thanking Mrs. Trudeau and our budget office for the work that they put in, and thanking this board for all of the work that you put in finalizing our budget on January 29th. Important for the community to know that now that the Board of Ed has a budget for this year moving forward, that later this week, on the 15th, Mr. Bloss will be sharing that budget with the Board of Finance at their meeting. And on March 6th, it is important for the community to realize that that would be the first public hearing, the Board of Finance holding their first public hearing on both the school and the town sides of our budget as those move forward. And Mr. Bloss and I will both be there on March 6th to present the school side of the budget, to answer questions from the Board of Finance, but I think most importantly to answer questions and to hear comments from the community. We have had really positive community support and involvement in this year's budget process. I think more than I've seen in past years. It would be really good to see that continue as we move through. And then ultimately on March 8th, the Board of Finance has their final workshop where it's likely that they will approve a budget on both the town and the school sides that would then move to town meeting and ultimately to referendum probably in early April. Along with that, it's important to note that there has been some press time spent at the state level on the governor's budget proposal. So the governor has made suggestions around the budget. The governor's suggestions include further reductions to ECS, the Education Cost Sharing Grant. So at this point, we know that ECS has been reduced and that we'll be receiving fewer dollars than we have received in past years. But again, to Guilford's great credit, that figure falls within the adjustment that the Board of Finance made to their anticipated ECS revenues last year. The governor has suggested an additional $290,000 reduction. It is only the governor's proposal. It has not been approved by the legislature. But even should that additional $290,000 reduction come to pass, it still falls within the adjustment that the town made to their anticipated revenues in ECS last year. Now, I know the town has lost other revenues additionally, so while it falls under the reduction they made to the ECS, it probably doesn't cover all of the reductions that the town experienced overall. So as we move through this budget process with the Board of Finance, it will be important for us to participate not only in the side of the discussion around our operating budget, but to be available to answer questions and to discuss the revenue side from the state into Guilford as that budget moves forward this year as well. We'll continue to monitor those discussions in Hartford. I don't think it'll be a full $290,000 additional dollars, but we'll need to continue to monitor that.
I did talk to Representative Scanlon briefly over the weekend, and he reminded me that a year ago when we were talking about the governor's proposed budget, it zeroed us out, and that would have been a $3 million hit, and we wound up having about getting approximately a $500,000 hit when we budgeted for $1 million. So he urged patience and calm, so
Well, it works.
we should do that. Yes.
And for the last piece of my report, I just want to note that on Friday, the state released the accountability report for the 16-17 school year, and I will turn the remainder of my report over to Dr. Keene, who will share that report and those results with you.
Thank you. as Dr. Freeman stated, we did have these results for a couple of weeks. We've been looking at our own data, but it wasn't until Friday that we could see everybody's data and have a way to look for reasonableness. So we've been doing some work over the weekend, and we're happy to share some of our findings with you. First of all, just as a reminder, accountability systems have several purposes. One is to track progress and help us make improvements, show us where our support is needed most, to recognize success, promote transparency to the public, and to satisfy federal and state requirements as part of the ESSA laws. Most importantly, though, our particular accountability system is not just about test scores. It's really a complete picture of a school or district to the extent that is possible. It does guard against narrowing the curriculum just to tested subjects. In other words, the arts are involved. PE performance is also involved. It expands the ownership of accountability to all the staff, including our support staff, our social workers, our school psychologists, our counselors. Everybody is involved in this, so it's not just the third grade teacher who teaches language arts and math or the seventh grade science teacher. So it becomes a school-wide project. And it encourages leaders not to view accountability as gotcha, but as a tool to guide and track our efforts. So the state looks at 12 indicators, and they collect data on our performance in science, language arts, and mathematics, our growth in those areas, our participation rate, our chronic absenteeism, which is defined as students who miss more than 10% of a school year, coursework for post-secondary and career readiness, which could be things like vocational courses, or it could be AP, or college, some of our classes that also have college credit. The exams, or the actual results of those courses, our graduation rates. On track in ninth grade just means that they have passed at least 5 classes. Our post-secondary entrance rate for 2- and 4-year colleges, physical fitness, and the arts. So those 12 indicators we really have to pay a lot of attention to. Those that have a little H beside them means that not only we're looking at the data for all students, but we're looking at the data a second time for just our high needs students. And high needs is defined as students with disabilities, students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, or students who are English learners. So that cohort of those 3 categories becomes a second look. You have a copy of our report, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, but this is our report. You can see that the index, or the rate, is actually how we performed. These are the targets, and this is a number we really pay attention to because this is the percent of the target, or the goal that the state sets for us. So you can see they were expected to get at least 75% of performance on all, but we're expected 100% of growth. Now, the growth is individualized for every student, so depending on their scale score, they had a growth target and what should be reasonable. Some children exceeded their growth target, some did not, actually went backwards, but we were hoping for 100%, an average of 100%. To exceed. Then you can see some of the other indicators, and they're all numbered here. You'll see 3 is missing. That's the participation rate, and I'll show you that in a second. But you can see, for example, in 4A, chronic absenteeism, all students, we want to be less than 5% chronically absent. But in 4B, it's the chronic absenteeism for our high-needs students. So there's a 4A and a 4B there. Those are those ones that are broken out again. So this is the Guilford report. This number that's highlighted in yellow, this 84.2, became our what we call our district performance index. Schools also got a report like this, and theirs would be a school performance index. So the very first thing we do is look at our scores or our index as compared to the previous index from last year to see if we're going in the right direction and see where the patterns are. You can see that these little arrows mean we either stayed the same, went down, or went up on each indicator. And we actually review every single indicator to make sure that we understand why they are like they are from last year to this year, because it's always about continuous improvement. There are also things called gaps. If a district or a school has an achievement gap, that means it is substantially different from the average statewide gap in any subject area. That can be for all students or for just high needs students. And the same is true for a graduation gap. And substantially different means one standard deviation difference from the state average. This is Guilford's number 3. Their participation rate is listed here. I'm very proud of this. It shows that we are not trying to hide any children. 99.5 is the lowest in any particular area, which probably is one child that we failed to test for whatever reason, or maybe more than one child, but less than 5. So that is really amazing. Schools are expected to have 95% or above. This shows where the gaps could occur, but as you can see, here's the size of our gap from our high needs based on our non-high needs, and where they look at the gap and compare it to the state gap, and we are below the state gap. So we do not have a Y in this column. That is important because when the state recognizes schools and districts of distinction, you cannot be a school of distinction unless you're in the top 10% and have no outliers or have no gaps. So if
Last year, were we, wasn't this a Y last year?
not for the
District.
district, but we did have a couple of schools that had gaps, and we still have a couple of schools that have gaps for different reasons, actually.
But as a district, we do not.
Okay.
So this is a slide that it always scares me to look at this because it is comparative data and it's relative. It's still not at 100%. But when we look at our district reference group, which is district reference group B, and these are all the schools or districts in our district reference group, and this is their district performance index. And you can see Guilford is number 2 in our district reference group. Number 1 is Greenwich. But you'll notice that some of these have an asterisk. Those districts with an asterisk also have an achievement gap as the district level. Okay?
At the district level?
Yes.
Okay.
Could be for graduation purposes or performance purposes. So I don't have a slide up there, but we also looked at the statewide, and looking at K12 districts only, we are actually number 4 in the state.
7 overall, 4th in the state when you look just at complete K through 12 districts.
Right, it's not fair to compare a district that's only got a high school.
Right,
for
or
example,
K-6 district.
Or a K-6 district.
Yeah.
So,
Like some of the regional
correct.
districts. Yeah.
So the top 4 districts in the state of Connecticut in order are New Canaan, Darien, Greenwich, and Guilford.
K-12 districts.
K-12 districts. Not bad.
Nope.
In fact, really good.
That's not shabby
That's
competition.
really good. No, that's hey, look, we're in the same. Yeah, I mean it's outstanding. It's outstanding.
And I would point out, we always caution about those measures and those rankings, but I feel better about this accountability index rather than raw test scores. Again, this includes graduation rate, this includes access to the arts, this includes physical education and
Attendance.
yeah, and attendance. And so, in my mind, that while this is still weighted to test performance, it begins to take other measures into account. And that was not something that we had at our disposal when we were participating with the Connecticut Mastery Test. And so, it's not just raw test scores. And so, I always get nervous about rankings. I always worry about rankings, but it certainly indicates that we are doing well, that we're making good decisions, and that the decisions are not simply about test performance or test scores.
Right. Can you repeat those 4 again?
New Canaan was the first with 89.1. Greenwich was 2 with 86.3. Darien was 3 with 85.7. And then Guilford, 84.2.
Just because I'm getting ready for the Board of Finance meeting on Thursday, I thought, well, I don't know, why don't I look up the OPM numbers from the municipal fiscal indicators to see where we are compared to the 3 towns ahead of us in terms of per student spending. Is that a shock that I might have done that? We are it's hard to believe. But we are 78th in the state of Connecticut in per student spending. New Canaan, which is 3 places ahead of it. Well, we spend $16,865 per student. New Canaan, the first ranked school, spends $19,576. In other words, about $2,700 more than us per student. Greenwich spends per student, no wonder they have later start times, $21,238. That's about $4,500 per student more than us.
Wow.
Darien, third place, spends $19,314. In other words, about $2,500 per student more than us. And then there we are in number 4. So the town right behind us is Farmington. They spend a little bit less than us, but it's very close. So no, I think this is, in terms of return on investment, I think this is pretty compelling data. If we were, if we had the extra $4,000 or $4,500 that Greenwich had, that would be, somewhere in the $12 million extra in our budget range, something like that. So this is, for the return on investment, I think this is outstanding.
Can
A
I
lot of-
ask
go
Can I
ahead.
ask a question, Dr. King? I'm looking at this schedule that you handed out, and it talks about ELA average percentage growth target, all students. And we're fairly low on that, and then also the same growth target for high-need students, and we were exceptionally low on that. What are they talking about here? I mean, why are we troubled?
Well, first of all, it's about individual growth, and each student has a growth target. And so when they say, okay, this was the average growth target for all students, and how many achieved their target. And so on this one for ELA, 62% of our students achieve their growth target.
Some of those students would be students who are already performing at the very
Yes.
highest levels of the test, and therefore their area in which to be able to grow is minimal.
Yeah.
And so it weights the growth of students all across the spectrum. The old system only measured moving students from a low band into an acceptable band. This says that even your students who are performing at the very top of the very highest band, there's still an expectation that those students will continue to show growth. It gets very hard to measure where you're at the very top of the scale.
And you can see that also last year we were very high in ELA and not so high in math. We put all of our efforts into mathematics and we really started focusing on it. And one of the questions we're asking is, did we let up? And so that's one of the things that we're really looking at and looking hard. Even though our performance in ELA is still high overall, our absolute performance, did we grow enough? And so growth counts about 40%, from 40 to 45% of the total accountability index. Growth counts much more than absolute performance.
To us, that is, again, one of the improvements of the SBAC compared to the Connecticut Mastery Test. It's not just about looking at the students who are on the fence between one band and another. It's not just looking at students in the lowest tier and trying to move them to an acceptable tier. We have an obligation to every single child, regardless of if you're at the very top, to make sure that they're experiencing individual growth. And we think that this is why this is a better assessment for Guilford than the CMT was.
Can I ask a question? This is collated across the whole district. Were you able to look within, we'll say, elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools? Were there any outlier schools? Was there areas that were maybe pulling some of these numbers down, or was everything pretty consistent across all developmental
We
levels of
didn't
schools?
look across groups,
Yeah.
like elementary versus middle
Right.
versus high.
Yeah.
And because they're really not comparable. When we go back to those 12 indicators, they,
Elementary only
Yeah,
is only
only
measured on
has
4
maybe-
of them.
I see.
and
I
high
see.
school has all 12.
I see.
And however, each principal has their own reports, and I am having individual meetings with every single principal to go over their data, to look at it carefully. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with all 4 elementary principals that we can talk about what are elementary measures and what are we doing about it now. One of the things that I think we can attribute to our good performance is that people are really paying attention to this. Not in a bad way, but in a way that says this is important and we need to pay attention to it. So I can't say that there is a particular outlier in a particular area, but we're certainly having lots of meetings about that now. And they're really, you can't really compare. For example, you can't compare a Baldwin with an Adams. They don't even have the same indicators, because there's some 8th grade indicators that Baldwin will not have. So, but we are looking at each individual school. Here is the school's report so that you can see how each school fared. And this is public information now, and I'll show you where everything can be found. You can look at every school in Connecticut. So we do have 2 achievement gaps. One at Cox Elementary School and one at Guilford High School. Because those are gaps, that puts them in a category 2 automatically. Calvin Leap, Melissa Jones, Guilford Lakes, and Adams are all considered category 1 schools. And just want to make sure.
But it's
I put
worth
this-
noting that Cox, Jones, and Lakes essentially have the same accountability index, but Cox is still identified as a 2, not a 1, because of the existence of a gap when you look at the high-needs students compared to the rest of the population. And so the numbers can be different than that ranking. Again, Greenwich outperforms us on the index measure, but has a gap and we don't. And so there's no direct correlation.
Correct.
Can you explain why Baldwin seems to be the outlier here? I mean, you said that they have different indicators, but
Baldwin doesn't have different indicators, but that's what we're looking at now. We know that there's a big jump between 5th grade curriculum and 6th grade curriculum. And we're meeting about that now to try to figure out, okay, what is going on? Why is that report as it is?
Is Baldwin's score worse than last year's?
I would have to go back and check. I'm not for sure.
Okay.
I know that they had some major changes in the near past. Their schedule changes would be
Right, yeah,
different.
go back
The
and-
way they structured classrooms would be different, but we're taking a good look at that now. I met with the Baldwin principal and assistant principal this afternoon.
So they, just from the news reports, there were 3/4 of the districts in the state where the scores went down.
Down.
And that strikes me, I don't know, you're more into statistics than I am, but
So
it strikes
it's a
me
little
that
unusual.
that's a setting the goals differently in
Yeah,
year
no,
two, right?
right, that doesn't happen by itself.
No.
But Ted, that's exactly the sort of question that we ask. And so when this data comes back to us, we then sit with the principals sit with the teachers. This should give us good questions to ask.
Right.
It shouldn't give us any answers. It points us in certain directions, and then we need to make thoughtful decisions about what we find.
And Dr. Keene, is the reason Baldwin categorized as 2 because they're below a certain performance? Okay. Okay.
Category 2 are in the second quartile.
Or with the existence of a gap.
Or with
Or with
But
existence of-
Baldwin doesn't have the gap.
No.
So, yeah, they're in the
Right.
second quartile.
No. It is worthy to note, and this is also in the press release, 3 of our schools were named schools of distinction, and that was Calvin Lee, Melissa Jones, and Guilford Lakes. In fact, there were 2 distinctions given to Melissa Jones and to Calvin Lee for highest growth and for highest performing. So what are our next steps? Like I say, I'm having individual meetings with principals. Paul and I have had many meetings. We are scheduling our spring assessment administration. One of the things we want to do differently this year is, last year we changed. We did math first. Our math scores went way up. And we're like, did changing that order have something to do when we think about test fatigue and those kinds of things? And so one of the things we're doing this year is we're going to try to have 2 first-time assessments. So we're going to start our assessment before spring break with our ELA. We're going to have a spring break off, and then the week following that off, and then we're going to start again, so that we are not just doing testing
For 2 weeks straight.
for 2 weeks. So we want 2 first-time experiences to try to battle any fatigue.
Could be.
Could be.
See
We're
how it
gonna
goes.
try it. We are verifying some of our data submission. We saw that maybe some of our submissions aren't as accurate as they should be. So we're looking at that now. We're verifying that all these numbers do make sense to us, or did we report something incorrectly? We're having conferences or notifications to parents about absenteeism. Sometimes parents don't realize their child has been missing as much as they have. Especially if it's a day here and a day there. I'm not talking about someone that, was in the hospital for a couple of weeks. We're also doing interim assessment blocks online. We're giving kids some tests around the content that we've been teaching, but then we're analyzing those, and we're looking at the item construction, because sometimes the students don't understand what the item is asking them to do. So we've been doing a lot of work around that this year. The math and literacy coaches have been working at each school as part of their goals to make sure that students are really clear, and teachers have some information that they can do something about now, not at the end.
All of that is going to be done in the larger environment of continuing to focus on the things in which we've been focusing.
Right.
We're getting good results. We know that we're making good decisions. And I mean that in light of the conversation we had just a few minutes ago about stress and anxiety as well. This is one of the most important things that we do, but if our students are not healthy and happy and well, then that begins to pale in importance. And so while we are proud of those numbers and will continue to work towards those numbers, we're going to make sure we do it in an environment where our students are healthy and happy and well.
That was one of my questions, was this is all wonderful information, but is there a way to measure, or there isn't, the health and wellness, the mental health and wellness of our students in reflection of such high achievement, to make sure that going to this stress and anxiety component, it's wonderful that we have these results, but hopefully it's not a great cost to the health and wellness of the.
We really try to not overemphasize testing in Guilford.
Right.
We don't make a big deal out of it with the children.
We won't be holding a press conference on this.
No, and we don't, really, do test prep.
No,
We
that's
don't
not what
do any
I
of that.
do you feel like this measure is a more holistic measure than
Absolutely.
other measures?
Yes, it's beginning to move in the right direction. As I said,
Right.
it's better than when we just took raw CMT scores and ranked the state that way. It's beginning to look at other measures, but we still constantly need to balance it with what we see, with what we experience in the schools, and always being responsive to the demands of our community, right? The community does demand high expectations. It does demand prepared students. So how do we continue to do that and, again, not fight our own systems? And so can we continue to have these high expectations but allow for more sleep and reduce some transitions and make sure that we have supports in place so that we don't have to compromise our expectations in order to lower the stress? How do we balance it in a way that students feel proud of their accomplishments, not stressed by the pressures?
Right.
And when I figure it out, we'll let you know.
The grand
Well,
question.
one of the important things here is saying that all kids matter.
Right.
And it's not just about
The highest achieving.
Yeah, the highest achieving students. It's students with special needs. Students, every single child is counted in this. So, there are no children that are ignored or left out. They're all important, and they're all expected to grow and to thrive and to learn. And so we have to work on that. How do we help make that happen in a positive way? Because if they're stressed, they're not learning. So we have to look at that. And if they're really stressed, they're not coming to school. And we really have to look at that too. So it's not a perfect measure, but I think it's one indicator. All of the information that I've shared with you, plus a lot more, is at edcite.ct.gov. That is where all the data and statistics and reports for the State Department of Education is housed, or are housed. And you can see all of the schools and districts there.
Can we get a copy of this presentation?
Yes, you may. I'll send it to you today.
And the curriculum committee may want to look at this a little later in the year when we've got a little more data and a little more review of it. Just a suggestion. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I was just going to say, under your chronic absenteeism line, and you said one of the ways that you're going to address that is to maybe have conferences with parents who have children who have been absent more than you expect. It really gives you an opportunity to dovetail with some of the issues you've brought up about school avoidance and anxiety, maybe even depression, and maybe bringing that up as a potential reason why there might be more absenteeism. So it really gives you that opportunity to
be able to
do
begin
two
offering
things at
supports.
once.
Exactly right.
Absolutely.
Which is
'cause
great.
Right. Those parents might not otherwise reach out.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? All right. And I think we can talk about this later in the year. I think when we have some more information, when you've had a chance to look at it more. So, but again, terrific. It wouldn't be a shock if we mentioned this at the Board of Finance meeting on Thursday.
It'd be a shock if you didn't.
Yeah, it would be. All right, next item on the agenda is, we're on to the board agenda. The 9.1 is to act on a personnel item, ratify the appointment of Nicole Carangelo, grade 3 teacher at Cox Elementary School. Is there a motion to?
I just want to note that this is a position for 1 year only through the end of the school year. It's to cover a medical absence.
Is there a motion to ratify Ms. Carangelo's appointment?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. You have a new teacher. 9.2 is to review, receive for possible action the bids on transportation for regular education students for the 2018-2019 school year and potentially beyond. Do you want to summarize what the bids were? Or we did talk about this quite a bit in the operations committee meeting. Do you want to?
Sure. If you have it up there, maybe you're best to, I don't have it open right now. Let me
Sure, I have it in front of me. I'm happy to just briefly note that our current contract for bus transportation expires at the conclusion of this school year. We put the bid out for public bid. We had a bidders meeting. We had some significant level of interest. We had 5 companies attend the bidders meeting, but ultimately we received only 2 bids on our contract. After reviewing those and discussing them with the board, we met with each company. We asked the companies to reconsider the bids and to give us alternates. We asked them to improve their bids, and we asked our incumbent company to price out a 1-year extension on the existing contract as well. You have an exhibit in front of you that lists STA, the incumbent company. It lists their original bid. They came back with an option 1 and option 2 that improved the numbers on their original bid. You have those in front of you. You also have their proposal for a 1-year contract extension. And additionally and finally, you have the original bid that we received from Specialty Transportation Incorporated. Upon meeting with them and reviewing the requirements of the bid, they chose not to revise their initial bid, but their initial bid remains more favorable than the original or either option 1 or option 2 as revised by STA. After a lot of consideration, Mr. Bowden, Mrs. Trudeau, and I all agree that it would be in the board's best interest to award this bid to Specialty Transportation over the life of the 5-year contract. This bid is favorable by approximately $350,000 over STA's best, and I have serious concerns that with the 1-year extension, we might lose that savings and find ourselves in a worse situation next year. So while we have had a very positive relationship with STA over the course of these last 2 contracts, I feel I have to recommend that the board award this bid to Specialty Transportation. They are currently the full district providers for both Hartford Public Schools and Avon Public Schools, and we have received very positive recommendations. We've asked. Both of those districts give nothing but positive reviews of the work being done and the relationship they have. Both companies would be providing an updated fleet. Specialty, as they will be new in this area, will be providing all 2018 buses as part of this contract. So that is our recommendation.
And the Specialties buses would be new equipment, I think, is what
Yes,
their bid.
they'd be all
their bid
2018
package
buses,
said.
correct.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, you've worked hard on this, and I know we were disappointed that we only got 2 bids, and I know that there's been some question in the community as to why did we only get 2 bids. Well, I can assure you that it wasn't anything we did or did not do. That is just what the market chose to respond to these bids. And I don't know whether they thought that STA, whether other bidders thought that STA was going to do what they needed to do to keep the contract, or that if there just wasn't interest because of the capital-intensive nature of the service. Don't know. Driver shortage, right?
And to make clear, Specialty is a significant increase over what we're currently paying for buses. We are currently paying well below market value. In year 1, Specialty, which is the lowest bid, represents more than a 15% increase over the cost of our transportation for services in this current school year. We simply had a very...
Same services.
For the same exact services, no enhancement of services. We have simply been below market value for the last couple or 3 years, and this is a correction, and that's what happens when contracts expire.
Okay, well, I don't, we talked about it in some length in the Operations Committee meeting, and I think the board is prepared to accept your recommendation, but is there a motion that we approve the regular ed transportation bid for the 2018-19 through 2022-23 school year in the total amount of $12,400,000, is that an 8 or a 6, Mr. Kazin? 8. 6, so it's $12,408,603. You know, we got to...
Correct.
You know, these old people on the board, you know, with bigger fonts.
Bigger numbers.
Help us out,
Bigger
will
print.
you? Is there a motion to that effect?
I'll move.
Second?
Second.
Any other questions or discussion? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Now, we should also note that I think it's been the board's hope that to the extent practicable and reasonable within the management discretion of specialty, that they would consider hiring current STA drivers. And I know that has been a practice from other districts. But
We have made clear to specialty that should they win this award, we would expect that they would give first consideration to drivers currently working in Guilford for STA. And if I may at this point, I would just like to specially note one employee, Marie Illinger, has been our manager with STA for the last several years and has provided exceptional service to the students, the parents, and the community of Guilford. And so while I know that we've made the right decision fiscally, Marie has been an important part of our team. She has worked diligently, and we hope that we will have the opportunity to continue our relationship with Marie. STA has provided great service, but she specifically and individually has provided exceptional service, and we thank her for that.
Okay, and I should note also that obviously we don't have any control under our contract with who specialty or anybody else hires. They are employees of a private contractor, an independent contractor, and we do not as a district have the ability to control either hiring, supervision, discipline, or anything else. No, I agree with you. We're not dissatisfied with STA. They've provided good service, and I think if we were asked to give a recommendation, we'd probably give one. But
Without hesitation.
yeah, and no, this is just it's
A fiscal decision.
it's a fiscal
It's
decision.
a money issue.
So, okay. So, anything else? Oh, I wanted to ask a question. Now that we've done this, do we have to start the bid out on the special ed runs, right?
That will be done
Later.
probably a little bit later.
We usually do that later in the year.
Yeah.
Okay.
We do that annually, and we do it a little bit later in the
Okay.
year.
We're at least in a position where we can start setting it up. Okay. 9.3 is to receive the annual audit report. Again, talked about it in some detail in the Operations Committee meeting, but Ms. Cohen, do you want to just summarize what the finding was?
Sure. We had another clean audit come back from Bloom and Shapiro, and I think probably the most notable recommendation would be simply to get a fraud assessment, and we discussed that as a board, that is not a bad idea going forward. The town is perhaps looking into doing the same. That's pretty much what we discussed.
And I would just note the auditors are making that recommendation to all of their clients as simple good practice. It's nothing
Yes, there
specific
is no
about that.
reason to think there's fraud, but just good practice.
Yes.
Yes,
That's exactly right.
yeah.
So specifically, the reports say that the accountants, quote, did not identify any deficiencies in internal control over financial reporting that we considered to be material weaknesses. So that's great. And we've had a clean report from years, frankly.
Yes.
And so I think Ms. Trudeau obviously
Kudos.
gets the lion's share of the credit on this because, it's a $60 million budget. And to have clean audits years in a row, I mean, Mr. Sands, it doesn't happen in every $60 million operation.
It's not as easy as our business office makes it look.
Yeah.
Yes, significant credit goes to Linda and to her office.
Yep.
Okay, any discussion on that? We did talk about it quite a bit in the operations meeting. 9.4 4 is Mr. Doe has asked for a kind of a cash flow budget transfer request of a transfer to special education tuition of $75,000 from the teacher salaries line in the amount of $75,000. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved. Second.
Any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. 9.5 is we've been requested to approve a donation of $4,381 from the Guilford High School Football Touchdown Club that is going to be used to pay the salary for an assistant coach for next fall, 2018 season. Is there a motion that we approve that donation?
So moved.
Second.
Second, any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, with our thanks, I'm sure you will.
With our thanks, and I'll note that we know that there will be questions on assistant coaching stipends for you Thursday evening at the Board of Finance. It would be a great reminder to remind the Board of
Right.
Finance how often our booster clubs pay for those expenses.
Very good.
9.6 in the same or similar vein is to approve a $1,580 donation from the Guilford High School Fencing Parents Booster Club, and this is for equipment, it looks like, and I'm not going to, I have no idea what any of those
Well,
things are. but they-
and in fact, if I may, I am going to mention what one of them is, because there's a typo here. There's the George scoring machine, so these are scoring machines that are used not only in practice, but at tournaments that are quite important to the bout, and to which the fencers are literally connected because it's an electronic scoring machine. The $1,580 is for a conductive fabric strip. So this is the strip that the students, the athletes, fence on. And what it does is for 2 of the 3 weapons, the foil and the epee, it prevents a touch when it hits the ground. It prevents it from setting the machine off and stopping play, falsely stopping play. And then the third is 2 floor reels, which are
Keeps you from tripping on the cord to which you are attached.
well, no, right, sort of, right. They hold the cords to which you're attached and release and give the fencer flexibility moving forward and back. I can tell you, having gone to several large tournaments recently, one of the things that a lot of the teams do is not only do they have these equipment, but they will bring pieces of the equipment to tournaments, because no school has enough. So that when we at Guilford High School held the novice fencing meet several weeks ago, we have other schools who will bring some of this equipment to try to help share all that. But they're a pretty significant piece of equipment in play here.
So
But
I
it
take
is a strip, not a strap.
I take it that's a motion, then we approve.
It is
accept the donation.
absolutely a motion.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. 9.7 is to act on a grant application, a Title VI grant application in the amount of $10,000 to provide additional school-based mental health services and counseling at Guilford High School. This would be a federal grant, I
That's
take it?
correct.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve this grant application?
So moved.
Second.
Any other questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we're doing better.
And as we do not have a grant writing position, I would just like to extend our thanks to Dr. Keene, who spent significant time putting this grant together very quickly once we discovered that it was available. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 10, committee reports. Policy committee, anything happening?
The policy committee is meeting in 2 weeks, so we will have much more to say after that.
Okay. Operations committee, we've talked a lot about.
We did discussed the new bids for the busing. I do think it's worth noting that Ms. Biagetti presented us with some exciting things coming down the pike for food service, namely for next year, but things to look out for in the schools. And it's probably worth noting, dare I note, that the turf field is currently closed because
The new turf field.
the new turf field is currently closed for use and likely will be for the spring sports season, which we're very disappointed about. The field is under warranty, but there seems to be an operational issue with the field splitting at the 30-yard line. So rest assured that we have several people on the case, and hopefully we'll get it resolved.
We'll work
as
closely
soon as
with
we
Parks
can.
and Rec and the Town Standing Building Committee to make sure that we resolve the issue and get it repaired properly as quickly as possible.
Correct. Right.
Okay. Curriculum committee?
We met in January, and our two topics for the month were updates about world languages and the world language program and the next generation science standards. We had a good presentation from committee members about this exciting change, and one of the biggest changes that we'll see this year is we're going to pilot the new test that will replace the CMT science that we've been doing for a long time.
Great.
Exciting.
How did that happen? Were we chosen to pilot?
No,
it, or-
everyone is. It's actually a field test.
Okay.
Last year, there were some pilots. This year, everybody in the state is going to take the next generation science standards aligned assessment, which I think will be good for Guilford, because then I think it will become very real to teachers once it's on the state test. And right now, it's still kind of this vague thing that's out there. So it gives a new sense of urgency a little bit for changing from knowing science to figuring out science and behaving like scientists. So that's exciting. It does change this year to 11th graders, which is different because in the past it's always been 10th graders taking CAPT. Now it's going to be 11th graders in the next generation science standards, but we will not receive scores this year.
May I ask when, so that's, they take the SATs in March or April. When does, is it, I'm not asking for a date. I'm asking generally, do we know?
Yes. We know.
That was on the calendar we had in front of us today.
I know. I don't have the date right in front
It's
of me.
not hugely important. I'm just
It's
aware
not
of how much
designated.
testing happens at junior year,
Yeah.
outside and inside school.
It is not designated by the state like the SAT is.
Right.
So the school gets to choose the day.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And so they've already selected a day. They've been considering any other conflicts.
I believe it's in April and SAT day is in March.
Okay.
Yes. Definitely SAT day is in March.
Okay. Anything else on curriculum? No? Town committee liaisons, anybody?
I always mention this here, and it's not really a town committee, I just don't know where else to put it, which is the Health and Wellness Committee, which is a committee within the district, which is headed by Jill Rabin, one of our deans here at the high school, but includes teachers, including physical education teachers and community members and Board of Ed liaisons. We met in the past couple of weeks. One of the things we have been working on is looking at the forms that teachers fill out, asking permission to use food in the classroom for curricular activities, and then the report form that comes from each of the principals at the end of the year, kind of compiling information and reporting back to the committee. So we were looking at these forms to try to make them, A, more user-friendly, and B, kind of provide useful information, which will then eventually come to the board, but also will, instead of being a simple kind of reporting of what happened, be a way for the district leadership to look at what's going on in their schools and perhaps improve where they need to improve, but also recognize where things are going well.
Okay. Any other town liaisons?
No,
All right.
nothing to report.
All right. Learn Board of Directors. Somebody go?
I did.
You
I
did.
attended the most recent, and we had an interesting presentation by the East Haddam Superintendent of Schools, whose name is escaping me, but I'm looking on Google.
Brian Reese.
Brian Reese, who presented the STEM efforts in really K through 12 at East Haddam, an interesting presentation. And that's about it to report from that meeting. They look forward to seeing a revolving group of us, I explained that they'll see a fresh face, had the opportunity to see a fresh face every month.
Okay, well, thanks for going. I think
Yes.
it's really good for us to try to do that.
Yep.
Okay. Public questions? Anybody? All right. Then is there a motion to adjourn?
There is.
A second?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much.